When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Valley. User: mtranch44. Posted: March 8, 1997.
I don't reckon I got much time left, so I figured I ought to leave something behind. Not that I expect many to read it. Hell, my boys ain't the type to sit around looking at a computer screen, and if they ever do, they sure as hell ain't the type to admit it. Why in the world so many of y'all are obsessed with this box when there's a world out there beats the hell out of me. But look, I got a story to tell before I go, and ain't nobody to tell it to. Maybe it's just the ramblings of an old man with lungs black as the bottom of a goddamn stove. A lifetime of smoking will do that to you, but my daddy was the same way, and his before him. Smoked till the day he died, a Marlboro burning down to the filter in his hand when he finally keeled over on the porch, watching the sun sink over the valley. I'd be damn proud to follow him that way, and looks like I will. After all, this land where he died has been in my family for more years than I can count, and I'm here till the end, just like him. You see, my great-great-granddaddy wasn't a good man, at least not at first, at least not by the standards people like to pretend they live by. He was a drifter, a card player, and by all accounts, a cheat. He rode into town on a horse that was more bone than muscle, carrying nothing but the dust on his boots, an empty flask, and an old blanket. No name, no past, just a man passing through. But then, one night, everything started changing when he stepped into a local saloon and sat down at the table with some of the worst men you could find in that part of Montana. The kind of men who settled debts with a six-shooter instead of a handshake. But my great-great-granddaddy, he had something they didn't. Luck, or at least the ability to make it look like luck. By the end of the night, he had a pile of money and a full flask of whiskey, but that didn't matter. The bastard he won it from wasn't the type to take losing lightly. The moment that last card hit the table, everything went to hell. The man stood up slow, mean grin stretching across his face, and before my great-great-granddaddy could even think to move, the table flipped over, cards and coins scattering like dead leaves in the wind. Bastard went for his gun, and you see, my great-great-granddaddy was smart enough at least to know he ain't got no chance in a fair fight, so he ran like hell. Took off out the back, leapt onto his horse, and rode until the town was nothing but a bad memory. My grandpa always joked that he left the flask, but what happened next makes that okay. You see, they say the land finds the man, not the other way around, and that night, the land found my great-great-granddaddy. After riding damn near till his horse dropped dead, he stopped by a stream to rest, the Water was calm and smooth as glass under the moonlight, and the second he laid down, he started dreaming. Only, it wasn't like any dream he'd ever had before. The river spoke to him. Not in words, not in anything a man could understand outright. It was a hum, a song, 1,000 beautiful voices all at once. It told him where to go. It told him that if he followed, if he listened, he would find what he was meant to find. A future, a family, a fortune that wasn't measured in gold, but something deeper. He could finally leave this nomadic life behind and have something of his own, leave a legacy. Come morning, he didn't question it, didn't hesitate. He followed the stream's pull. 100 miles he went into the mountains, or at least so they say. He stopped when he saw a little cabin tucked away in a valley so quiet it didn't feel real, like he had stepped into a place the rest of the world had forgotten about. He tied his old horse up, knocked on the door, and that's when my great-great-grandmother and great-great-granddaddy met. Right there, in that valley where we live today. Now, I don't actually know much about my great-great-grandmother. None of us do. She was young, too young to be living out there alone, and when she saw him, she looked at him like she'd been waiting, like she already knew his face before he ever knocked. And of course, they done fell in love the way only people do in stories. Quick, complete, no doubts, no questions. The only thing she ever told him about her past was that she was a widow, but she never said how. Never said who, and she never left that valley. Not once, not for supplies, not for town, not for anything. Of course, this didn't matter to my great-grandfather, though. They built a life here, had 4 boys, and those boys had boys of their own, and crazy enough, not once in all these years since that man first stepped foot in this valley has a girl ever been born into our family. Now, there are stories, of course, old whispers that say us men don't actually own this valley. The valley is us, and that the stream, whatever the hell it really is in our blood. That it called my great-great-granddaddy home because he was always meant to be there, and that as long as we stay, as long as we take care of this place, it will take care of us, like my great-great-grandmama did him, whoever she was.
Subject, the door in the floor. User, 19 extra STK. Posted, September 2nd, 1994.
The first apartment I ever lived in was haunted. At the time, I was pushing back against my Catholic upbringing by going through an atheist phase, convinced that the only real things were the ones I could see, touch, or hear. The experiences I'm about to share challenge that view of the world, and now, more than 20 years later, not exactly Christian, but I've had to expand my worldview. It all began in the fall of '72 when I left high school for college. No one in my family had ever gone to college before, but it was the only reasonable way to get a draft exemption. The apartment was above a family-owned grocery store and way bigger than it needed to be. The landlord, Mr. Gillespie, said that it had originally been 2 apartments he and his wife had combined into one when they started their family. Now their kids were grown and gone, and they owned a house a few minutes' drive away, so They were willing to rent the place cheap to the right person. I was apparently that person. There were 2 bathrooms, a living room, and 4 bedrooms. Way too much room for one person. I don't remember what the rent cost anymore, but it was cheap even for the time. Mr. Gillespie explained that he'd rather have one good tenant who could comfortably afford to be there than a rotating group of strangers pooling money and not respecting the space. That had been the case with the previous tenants, and he'd learned his lesson. We shook on it, and I moved in later that day. I managed to scrounge up a bed and hi-fi from a second-hand shop and walk through each bedroom to decide which I wanted, ending up in the one at the front of the building. At some point in the days after, I was on my way out when I glanced in the room at the top of the stairs. I don't know how I'd missed it before, but it was easily the biggest and brightest among the bedrooms. Why hadn't I picked this one? I shook my head and resolved to move my stuff when I got back. For some reason, it slipped my mind. Classes started before I had much time to settle in, so if anything strange happened, I did notice. That all changed on the night of November 16th when I was out in a bar with some classmates and a news report about the police action at Southern University came on the television. 2 boys had been killed by police and it weighed on us. We all said our goodbyes and called it a night. When I collapsed into bed, I couldn't get the thought of what had happened out of my head. Those kids weren't any older than us, and they'd been snuffed out like it didn't matter at all. I was furious. I was sad. I was scared. In my head, I could still hear the hubbub in the bar, and then, all of a sudden, it was outside my head, too. That is to say, suddenly I wasn't just remembering the sound, I was hearing it again from the kitchen outside my bedroom. The first sound I could identify was clinking glasses, and since my apartment was close to the train tracks, I thought it might be a passing freight, but then I heard silverware on ceramic as if people were eating. It sounded like someone in the kitchen was having a dinner party, and not a small one. I wish I could say I jumped out of bed and charged into the kitchen, but I did exactly the opposite. I kept my eyes closed, pulled the pillow around my ears, and stayed that way until sleep came. That was the beginning of what I've come to call my supernatural year, which lasted until the end of my first year. Mostly it was mild stuff, a feeling that I wasn't alone, flashes out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't sinister, just odd and unsettling for someone with no grounding in that kind of thing. I kept trying to write it off as my imagination, but then an unexpected interaction made that impossible to maintain. It was an evening in the spring of '73. Some friends and I were having beers at Pizza King when one of the new waitresses, Shelley, came up to our table. She was a beautiful girl, maybe 5'2" and curvy with curly brown hair past her shoulders. I was about to order another round of Schlitz when she interrupted me. "Hey, are you Jack?" My friends looked at me like I'd just grown a third eye. I said I was. "Can I speak to you for a minute? In private?" I wasn't exactly known for pulling women, so the guys were in a state of total incredulity, and frankly, so was I. "Sure, lead away." I followed her over to an empty pool table and tried my best to look cool. It wasn't my finest moment. "So, what's shaking?" I asked. She looked around conspiratorially, then said, "I hear you're living above Gillespie's store, is that right?" This wasn't the way I'd hoped the conversation was going to go, but I rolled with it. "Yeah, that's right. Why?" She put her tray down on the rail of the pool table, freeing her right hand up to fiddle with one of her curls. Have you noticed anything up there, like, unusual, I stammered for a second. Unusual how? Like feeling as if someone else is there, but you're alone. Maybe seeing things or hearing them, things that aren't there, like. The dumbfounded expression on my face must have confirmed it for her because she nodded her head. I thought so. I managed to shake off my surprise long enough to ask her how she could possibly know that. Her voice dropped low enough it could barely be heard above the jukebox. My girlfriends and I were the last people to live there. It was so weird. We thought it was perfect, cheap, lots of space, but we weren't there a month before that funny business started. One of my roommates, Lori, used to babysit a little girl and would sometimes bring her over so we could all gossip while she was working. That girl was maybe 5 years old and would play in Lori's room. She never got in any trouble, but she did start talking about her invisible friend. She'd tell us about the games they'd play together, about how it would come through a door in the floor. It? Yeah, it. She said it wasn't a boy or a girl or even a person, but it spoke English fine so they could be friends. Once that started, Lori started sleeping at her boyfriend's and moved out pretty quickly. Word got around and we couldn't find another roommate, so we all left. Then I heard a student had moved in. I was sure Shelley was pulling my leg, so I tried to smile, but the serious expression on her face stayed right where it was. You're serious. Has a heart attack, darling. Have you seen it yet? You can't be serious. So that's a no? Well, don't say I didn't warn you. You're cute. I'd hate for something to happen to you. Shelley picked up her tray and was about to leave before I managed to suppress my doubts long enough to ask a question. Which room was Lori's? She stopped. Right at the top of the stairs, biggest bedroom in the place. Bet you don't go in there, huh? No, I guess I don't. Well, now you know why. She walked away, her hips swinging to the beat of the jukebox. When I got back to the guys, they were practically salivating. I lied, of course, said it had turned out we knew some of the same people, and one of them owed her money. They didn't believe me, but her asking me out and me not telling them was even less likely, so they let it go. When I got back home that night, the stairs seemed longer than usual. They weren't, not really, but it felt as though I'd walked 2 stories more than usual when I finally got to the top. The big bedroom was dark, but it didn't feel empty. I averted my eyes and went straight to bed. Then, just as I was closing my door, I thought I saw a flash of light down the hallway, shining against the wall. There was only one room it could have come from. What did I do, you ask? I locked my bedroom door, closed my eyes, and wrapped my pillow around my ears. Then, the next day, I started looking for a new apartment.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.